Hello, hello, it's Damascena here. I thought I would drop in because I took a look at our new moon chart for this month, new moon in Scorpio. And I thought, wow, I saw something that really interested me. And I thought that it might be handy if we took a minute to just sort of isolate this one configuration and look more deeply at what's happening. As an astrologer, I am always really interested in what's happening in the world and how what's happening in the world is being magnified through the astrology. Or another way of saying that is how the astrology is magnifying, lending energy, and sending its kind of like its impulses into the collective and having us act in a certain way. And certainly everything that we have seen kind of erupt, might be a good word for it, in the collective over the past month was written in the stars. And earlier we looked at some of the eclipses and how the eclipses were mirroring, they took place in Libra and Aries, along the nodal axis, this kind of axis of war and peace. And now we have the new moon in Scorpio. Scorpio is ruled by both Mars and Pluto. It is the ruled by water, so a feminine sign. It is the feminine nighttime domicile of Mars in traditional astrology. And in modern astrology, it's ruled by Pluto. Pluto, the lord of the underworld, who rules nuclear energy. And when I looked at this chart, what I saw is across from the new moon is the planet Uranus. And Uranus is involved with the Promethean impulse in people. Archetypal astrologers think that Uranus was badly named, and he probably should have been named Prometheus because he's so related to that impulse for freedom, liberation. He's the revolutionary. He's about rebellion against closed structures of power. Any kind of power that coalesces around a central rod is related to Uranus. Uranus is the modern ruler of Aquarius. And if you guys haven't noticed, we've kind of been in that transitory period between the age of Aquarius, or sorry, the age of Pisces and the age of Aquarius. And so it feels like we're in some kind of evolutionary cauldron that's leading us again, like another breadcrumb on the path to the age of Aquarius. This moment feels like that. Well, anyways, when I saw this configuration, I thought, wow, this is what we call a tower moment. What do I mean by the tower or a tower moment? So the tower is one of the major arcana in the tarot. The tower is again, like you've heard me mention traditional and modern. So traditionally, the tower is ruled by Mars. There are some people who think Uranus is the ruler of the tower. And, in a sense, that makes sense because Uranus is all about higher consciousness. It's about this like eruption of kind of like the unconscious contents erupting out of the consciousness to become conscious, right? That like kind of Jungian term of unconscious content spilling forward, becoming conscious and wanting to act on that liberatory energy. That's that Prometheus gave the fire of the gods to the people, the humans, so they could be free and didn't need to rely on the gods anymore. And I love the work of, he's an artist and an esotericist. His name is Lee McCloskey. He writes a book called Tarot Revisioned. And in Tarot Revisioned, I want to give you an idea of what some of the imagery for the tarot is. Let's see if I can't share my screen here and have us look at, I think I pulled, oops, sorry about that. I pulled one up on Pinterest, so let's share this one. So this is not Lee's artwork here, but you can just see, the tower and how it's got this fiery top, right? And this primal kind of energy and this man falling from the tower. And then I'll show you also what Lee's artwork looks like a little bit, so you can have an idea of what his interpretation of the tower is. So it's kind of, you can see all of the like men at the bottom and this like towering, twisting, almost tree-like vine here. And then there's like a man at the top, right? And so seeing these images, we can kind of understand why both Uranus and Mars sort of make sense in the context of this being a tower moment and us having our new moon in Scorpio, the traditional ruler of which is Mars, and the new moon is conjunct Mars across from Uranus, right, and Taurus. And one of the things, you know, we talked about Uranus ruling Aquarius, but we also, a lot of astrologers think that Uranus is exalted in Scorpio. Like this Scorpio is a place that Uranus does well. It creates a dimension of reality for Uranus to be unhindered in his expression, right? So there's this kind of opposing energy here between Mars and Uranus, creating what we call a tower moment. And so I want to read to you a little bit from Lee's book about the towers so we can understand what we're seeing a little bit better and understand how some of it may actually be, I don't want to say in service, because we never see this kind of tragedy and want to say that it's in service, but just to understand the context a little bit better. So the tower is the 16th card in the Tarot Arcana, and it's represented astrologically by the planet Mars. So Mars is associated with fertility, aggression, war, and raw sexual instinct. The attribution of the planet Mars, known as the god of war and fertility, expresses a great deal about how and in what fashion the tower itself operates. So it's direct, assertive, and primal. And its relation to sexuality is significant because sexual nature is the least understood quality in our human makeup. So the tower represents male sexuality and potency, which impels towards direct physical action. Its force is not rational, but rather it's instinctual. And we see this kind of almost medieval play happening in the Middle East, where the violence and the aggression that we're seeing isn't neat and tidy like other wars that have been sort of sanitized for us in the past. Like there were images of Hamas's attack, and the level of brutality was literally shocking. You could see the primalness, the like pure rage and almost disgust inside of their actions. And then likewise, mirroring that kind of aggression, we're seeing the same thing back from the from Israel. So there's this kind of primal, instinctual, gut level violence happening, right? And its force, okay, it says here, the force is not rational, but instinctual. It's the raw energy of life that wills to form, to impregnate, and will not remain repressed. Like it will not, the lid is coming off. And we saw that in the imagery of the tower with the top coming off. And we see that energy expressed in Uranus with his kind of explosive and up and out action. Now, with Scorpio being a water sign, Mars's rulership brings fire to it, and Pluto brings that underworld quality. And so a good representation or symbolic kind of way of looking at Scorpio is the volcano and lava, right? Like that actually being sort of the element that rules Scorpio, and that like long enduring alchemical cauldron of lava that just lays sort of dormant. I'm not sure if that's actually correct, but it could appear to us, right, on the surface of Earth, like it's just laying dormant for years and years before there is this explosion. And so here we find that connection to the energy that will not remain repressed. So it must find expression, even if it has to destroy in order to do so. So the archetype appears dark and dangerous to the civilized self. It like offends those of us who want to live in a civilized world. And we have like this as humans who've lived, especially in the West, this sort of desire to define and control our circumstances. And we have all of these levers of power that help us do it, like the protective facades of religion and society and tradition, and how those have all tried to channel and construct belief systems in an attempt to organize and subdue the tower's tremendous power and unpredictability. It's like almost like our whole world is constructed in opposition to the tower. Like we all fear the tower, and here we are, like on the precipice, or not even on the precipice. As I record this today, Uranus, Mars and the sun are within 5 degrees of opposing Uranus. So we're in the tower moment now, you know. And we saw how all of the energy of the eclipses was being played out in Libra and Aries also being a Mars ruled sign, that kind of axis of war and peace in a sense. And that's where the evolutionary nodes are now. And there was a lot of, in the beginning, talk about peace. And I remember commenting like, I don't understand why we're not calling for a ceasefire. That's never not happened in this moment. And that while there's been protests that have kind of organically erupted in the West calling for peace, there is not any type of peace that's on the horizon. That's what we're hearing come out of the tower machine, for lack of a better word. And so one of the many ways that any culture creates a fairly stable picture of reality is through defining and limiting its focus. It is through the learning of restraint and the defining of the characteristics one considers the self that help compress experiences and the world into recognizable forms and codes. I'm reading here from Lee's book. This process can be considered the act of creating the intellectual architecture of who and what one believes itself to be. He quotes St. Paul in Corinthians saying, the body is the temple of the Holy Spirit, and that man is responsible for being the physical expression of this truth, giving the other side of the tower, which I'll talk about in a moment. So this idea gives insight into one of the traditional titles associated with this archetype. This is a traditional look at the tower being the house of God. That's one of the tower's symbols, but not when we're in a tower moment. So this title has been interpreted in a number of ways, but most convincing seems to be that individuals create structures or ego complexes, which they identify as themselves. And these houses of self-awareness tend to try and build a tower of self-image and consistency. So man is basically a creature of habit for whom change holds varying degrees of danger. There is a primitive and almost instinctual desire to create boundaries and definitions in which one can live and feel secure. And so when we're confronted with a tower moment, and I know I've been going through this myself and oscillating between kind of surrendering to the fact that I'm powerless in this moment and I can't really do much about anything that's happening overseas, and feeling like I need to do something, anything, and, you know, kind of writing phonetically in my Facebook stories, you know, I've just been along for the roller coaster, allowing sort of my human self to have its say. And and kind of, for lack of a better word, vomit all of the different things I'm feeling. And I go from rage to disgust to wanting peace again, and wanting to be, to reach my hand out to make peace, and then being angry all over again, and allowing myself to sort of be on this ride of looking at change, and what does that mean to the human being, and how the human being wants to have control and see through things through the lens of a civilized culture, and how we understand that what we're looking at is a tower moment, and the primal and the instinctual have taken over. And so Lee says that one of the problems connected to the drive for consistency and security is that life and experience can become static, and that which remains in a state of stasis for too long begins to decay and die. And we see that with this particular issue in the Middle East, that the larger impetus underneath this latest wave of violence has been because the Palestinian question has been left to sort of decay and die. It's sort of been swept under the rug. Nobody really talks seriously about it. There aren't really any consequences for anyone doing it, and the benefits are immense to leave the situation as it is. When you look at it from sort of a geopolitical and financial angle, you can see that just sort of leaving it to simmer, and every once in a while, as the Israel side calls it, mow the lawn. So kind of like lift the lid off the simmering pot, allow the sort of like smaller tower moment to happen, and release the pressure valve, and then things just kind of go on the way they have. And so this thing begins to decay and die. And so this is not only true of organic forms, but also of ideas and beliefs. And certainly we're seeing, out of the Palestinian side, what people who have been isolated and sort of left with their ideas and beliefs too long, and not had exposure to outside cultures and outside opinions, and really been in diversity, what diversity does for our ideas and our beliefs and how they evolve. Now we're seeing that sort of decay of ideas and beliefs, and the tendency on the part of many people to feel as though they have the only answers or know the true truth. And that's not only problematic, it's unnatural. And that certainly is the case in the way that this conflict has been locked into stasis. Both sides, and this is verifiable, it's not the collective illusion that we've all bought into, but verifiably both sides want all the land, and it's a zero-sum game. Neither side really wants to make peace. They both believe that they have the divine right to the land. And so it's just sort of, and by both sides, I mean Hamas, the leadership of Gaza. The Palestinian Authority has been much more willing to negotiate, but there's been this strategic effort to keep Palestinian leadership divided, so that a peace deal couldn't happen. It was very easy to say, we don't negotiate with terrorists, and because the Palestinian Authority doesn't represent a large portion of the Palestinians, we don't have anyone to negotiate with. So it was like purposely put into this kind of box of stasis where it was let to sort of die. And so listen to this. I think this is interesting. The drive for security at the expense of growth and evolution is an element which stimulates the second title attributed to this archetype. And we can think about this too, even in the context of the pandemic, and how the last few years have been as well, and potentially even bringing it down to the personal level. And I know for me, there was a point early in the pandemic where I started to feel like, wow, I'm living Groundhog Day. Like every day is the same. We were on this really booming growth trajectory just prior to the pandemic hitting. I remember we were in a lovely period. There was economic growth, whether you liked the politicians or not. It was undeniable that the economy was growing, technology industry was booming. We were kind of living in this few-year bubble after recovering from the financial crisis of 2008 on this kind of upward swing. And then all of a sudden, 2020 came in and safety became almost a neurotic cultural meme, right? So the drive for security at the expense of growth and evolution is an element which stimulates the second title attributed to this archetype, the lightning struck tower. And that's really what describes the tower moment, is the moment that there's an impact or a lightning strike. So the cataclysm suggested by this is fundamental to understanding what happens when the Mars or Martian force of the tower is ignored. Individuals cannot build walls about their lives and expect them to stand indefinitely. Like nature herself, there are periods of pastoral splendor as there are cycles of devastation and destruction. Each serves as an aspect of natural function, and one is not better than the other, simply different. So peace and disruption are part of the natural cycles with which Mother Nature balances her many qualities and environments. And this is a very Scorpionic trait. Like there is this kind of sense of chaos and cataclysm in Scorpio, the real devastation and destruction of nature. That's Plutonic, it's Scorpionic. And you know, it like raises everything down to the ground, and it is out of the ashes of that the phoenix rises. So the same is true within our individual psyche. What we're seeing in the out picturing of this event is something that happens on an individual level as well. It's the unnatural desire to control circumstances, which often unleashes the destructive elements embodied in the tower. Because old forms must, it's an evolutionary imperative, they must give way to the new in order to allow new growth. So the lesson of the tower deals with coming to terms with the fact that nothing in life is ever static. All beliefs having to do with a sense of having found the answer are absolute fictions. Every fiction, whether religious, spiritual, philosophical, or social, serves a valid and necessary purpose for a period of time. And I know that having sort of a stake in this, this conflict, that the way I've been moving through it is to literally just open my hands and not grip on, and to feel that somatic sense of righteousness or crystallization when it comes in, when all of a sudden I feel that righteous indignation. And as soon as I feel that, I know I'm beginning to crystallize around something. And it doesn't lead anywhere. We've got to be really open when evolution happens. Through these processes, we have to completely surrender to the momentum the process is taking us in. And it is on the back end, when it is time to rebuild, that we can, you know, sort of take on our positions, you know, and look at how do we cooperatively rebuild. And so this gives self-awareness, or the ego, a serviceable structure with which to gauge experience and self-image. These structures of belief are only temporary. So that self-awareness for the ego is that fiction, right? That's how the ego is aware of itself, is through these fictions and labels and beliefs and boxes, the religious, spiritual, or philosophical. That's all ego-based. But these structures of belief are only temporary, and they must always lead to the next level of understanding if our goal is evolution. So if not, they begin to suffocate the spirit within. And that's the spirit within the person, within the family, within the community, within the collective. So when the tower awakens, it can shake the primacy of the waking consciousness, causing it to re-examine its assumptions and beliefs, forcing an evolution into another realm of awareness and understanding. This archetype is neither easy nor is it gentle. It is at times terrifying, utterly life-altering, and its purpose is not to comfort. Its purpose is to make sure that the forces of life are allowed to dynamically push into new boundaries of both personal and collective growth. So it is meant to make us uncomfortable, right? It's meant to make us so uncomfortable that we can't sort of go back to how it was before. So in one way or another, either consciously or unconsciously, the archetypal forces and patterns here are experienced within the individual and collective environment. And it's important to keep in mind that this is not an abstract or a metaphysical doctrine aimed at intellectual study, but rather a working interaction of life based upon the psychological, energetic realities which all persons encounter throughout their lives, regardless of their beliefs. And that's the thing about the Tower and its primacy and its instinctualness, you know, like, and that is that relationship sort of to Aries, like that combustible essence that doesn't think. There isn't a rationality to it. And so for many of this gets experienced. Pluto rules fear in the underworld. It gets experienced sometimes as the impetus that plunges us to the underworld. We have trauma and fear come up. There's so much of this as a body-based, animalistic experience, the Tower is. And so, you know, we need to remember that when we are in the Tower moments, that the only way through the Tower is to let go, to feel and to experience all that the Tower is trying to do, what it's trying to break open for us alchemically. And we talked in some of my transmissions about Venus in Leo and how Leo is sort of that search for the essence that is the inner gold of the self, right? And there is this act of needing to be penetrated for that essence to flow forward. And so that is the purpose of the Tower. You know, it's got a phallic nature to it, right? It is like the erectness of the male member that seeks to impregnate with the new. And so in doing, it's going to break up and needs to break up old structures. And none of that happens. None of it. I mean, even when we lay on the most simplified, symbolic understanding of what I just said and look at like when a woman becomes pregnant and then a baby grows, none of that is mental. That is all happening on an animal body, cellular, somatic, physical level. And this is how we approach these moments, is we just sort of, we get to be the one who's being, for lack of a better word, fucked by the Tower, right? We are the ones who are kind of splayed out, allowing the Tower to act upon us in service to the greater transformation. So the other thing that is really interesting here is if you look, we've got Venus, the ascendant, and a whole bunch of signs or a whole bunch of bodies, we'll call them, in Libra. And this creates a really another interesting dynamic. And we'll just talk a little bit about the Venus journey. So Venus is moving from the third eye into the throat chakra. And Libra is all about attachment, and Scorpio is really, we can look at Scorpio as about like deep, true authenticity, like the authenticity that rises up within us. Remember, Scorpio is about the depths and that sense of like what kind of rises from the womb and from the underneath and arrives like up in the throat. And so there's this sort of tension between um, Libra, where Venus is, and the energy of where the sun is, Scorpio, between this like attachment and authenticity. And with Venus being in the throat chakra, a lot of people have told me I haven't been able to write or communicate lately. And that's a function of Mercury was just in Scorpio. Mercury's in Scorpio, it's more introspective. It's like doing existential detective work. It puts Mercury to work in like deep researching, wanting to probe the mystery, unveil secrets, revelations, puts him in service to that a little bit more than communication, right? But so now we're moving into the throat chakra band or gateway of where the Venus journey is. And obviously that rules speaking. And so a lot of people may be feeling a kind of tension between attachment to their groups and really speaking and being and acting on what is true for them, like liberating the voice and speaking. And so what I want to encourage people is there is kind of a stake that so many people have in this conflict, because if you're not directly involved with people on the ground, there is certainly a most of the Western governments are involved in some way. The whole globe is involved. So I think we all have the right to feel, emote, speak, and be inside of this larger collective conflict in any way that feels true for us. We all have the right to be experiencing the tower moment and to being with what is true and authentic for us inside of the tower moment. And so, really looking at that tension, like I've been looking at it myself, like, will I let my group down if I say this? And that tension between the Libra attachment and authenticity, because sometimes they're at odds. They're not always at odds. I mean, most of the time, we're not actually faced with losing belonging if we speak our truth. If we've set up our life in the right way, there's most of the time, those two things are in alignment. But there are times when we may lose belonging if we speak our truth, right? And then one of those things has to win out. We either have to be devoted to our authenticity, that deep scorpionic current coming up, that deep need to be in relationship, primal relationship with the truth that lives within us versus the attachment that might cost. And for other people, the loss of attachment might be way too high. And so they're feeling as though they cannot speak, voice, or give expression to that tower moment. And so I just want to presence that tension being alive, because the new moon's ascendant is on like right by where we had the eclipses. We've still got the south node in there, and Venus is there. And so, there will be that kind of like, oh, I want to temper it down. I want to make sure that my friends still like me, or that people around me still have respect for me. So find an outlet, like that would be my recommendation, whether it's just being with somebody is going to love you no matter what, to get this kind of towery expression moving. Because what happens when we prioritize attachment is we move into that kind of civilized framework. That's kind of what attachment is, in a sense. Like they both live in that, they're the kind of agreed upon tenets of society and relationship, and Libra rules those things, right? Well, to be in the primacy and the fire of truth and the alchemical cauldron, we have to sort of sever our attachment to those attachments, right? And allow ourselves to just cook in the gook and the mess and the shit and the piss and the vomit of the primal, right? And this is how evolution happens. And so I encourage everybody who's listened to this to support that in other people as well, not just in yourself, but in other people. Like really make a commitment when people are saying things that are gross or disgusting or hurtful or, you know, just totally different than how you view it. You just allow them to be in their own alchemical process. Just understand that everybody is sort of bumping up against these evolutionary forces and trying to make sense of it for themselves. And the throat chakra and liberating the voice and the sound within the body is such a key and important element to alchemy and getting the energies actually flowing. And so while you're giving yourself space to do that, try and give other people space to do it too. I mean, I really, really made use of the scrolling on, or, you know, if I know somebody's diametrically opposed to me, but I love them anyways, I've just unfollowed them and I'll follow them again when this is over, just because I love them and I don't want this to ruin anything, but it's not necessary for me to see their stuff, be triggered by it all the time, or to be actively wanting to judge or you know, have that head-to-head opposing energy. That doesn't work. That's not actually alchemy. What alchemy is the surrendering to what the body, the soma, the consciousness, the forces of the unconscious, it's the surrendering to that. It's not actually crystallizing in a position and coming up against another person and pushing against it. That's Libra energy, the house of open enemies. Oppositions are kind of the nature of Libra in a sense. So we're looking at the sun being in Scorpio, the new moon being in Scorpio, and wanting to, you know, underworld work necessitates surrender. And it's not a weak stance. Surrender is power. Pluto is the power that is forged in the dark when we lay out our bodies as a feast, as like food or manna for demons to feed on. And all of that extra gunk, all of our outdated perceptions, beliefs, ways of being, all of the conditioned stuff that just isn't working anymore, all that rot that we talked about at the beginning of the call, all of that can be shorn off, taken off, and then we emerge just with that, like, and that we're penetrated, right? So that essence can flow forward, and we emerge so much more closely aligned to the essence self from the scorpionic underworld. And so I wanted to say that so that we're giving grace to ourselves to have this process, and we're giving grace to other people to have the process as well. So thanks for following along. I appreciate it. And I'll talk to you guys soon.